Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. So we're going to slowly start the third session. That's something relevant to the rule that we're talking about this morning, and relevant to the trade, relevant to the infrastructure, relevant to the geopolitics. That is the Belt and Road Initiative. In the recent decades, China keep giving the world all sorts of different new initiatives. Belt and Road Initiative was not strange things for Chinese because it's we have old Silk Road, and this is called the New Silk Road. And for European people, it's not new things as well, because the name itself was created by the European, the New Silk Road. So what happening on the Belt and Road Initiative since 2013, and what will be this, because this is a century project, and this is a project that try to bring theoretically on paper and on media, everything is theoretically want to bring everyone together. But of course, there are a lot of problems, questions, and tension, especially on the geopolitics. This morning, we talk a lot, and we talk a lot about the power, the global leader. But if everyone pay attention, probably you can see there is a pattern there. If you are grows fast, like your country, 8%, nobody feel that this is a threat. If you are a very rich country but small, fine. If you are fast, if you are big, territory big, and especially if you are with thousands of years of civilization, that will be a threat, because people easily not on the same page, chicken talking to duck, couldn't understand each other, what are you doing? That's why we want to bring this morning's discussion and wrap it together on the first panel this afternoon to talk from the economics perspective, politician perspective, and the business perspective to see the new phenomenon under this initiative, how it's going. I want to give a little bit notice that in this panel, we have a long-distance connection from Peking University, from Beijing. Professor Wu, from a very well-known professor on the Belt and Road Initiative in China, will connect in with us. I think he already online, right? I will first ask Zhang first to start, and then I will connect Professor Wu in because of the time difference, and then we continue. So questions, if you have with Professor Wu's presentation and talk, please be free to raise your hand, and we will bring you in with the conversation. Can I please ask you first, opening our discussion? Yes, thank you.
Well, I don't know whether anybody here is going to argue that it is a threat to Europe. I know that my argument is that it is not a threat to Europe, but an opportunity. I am responsible in the government of Gibraltar for BRI and for the relationship, trading and cultural between the People's Republic of China and my country. We have a number of enterprises that have already come to Gibraltar. And in fact, I think that the initiative of President Xi in making this his primary aim is a brilliant development which is good for the whole of mankind. I see it in a context where my country has been the kind of place that can only exist in the kind of concept that is the Belt and Road, because we have had an importance historically as a trading outpost going back to the beginning of trade in the Mediterranean with the Phoenicians. So you have to go that far back. And the Phoenicians were people who traded by going in sailing ships 2,500 years ago in the Mediterranean and buying stuff in one port and selling it in another. The Belt and Road Initiative has to be seen as a system for delivery of goods. And if you feel threatened, it can only be because you feel that the delivery can only be in one direction. Because the road that brings goods to you is a road that can take goods from you in the opposite direction. So what it does is it improves the cost of delivery of products. And that is what every transportation system since the beginning of time has done in order to get goods from the producers to the consumers. By doing that, the entire concept of the capitalist system, which has embraced this philosophy, you know, the global network of the British Empire was a network of trading posts. In the Mediterranean, it was Gibraltar, Malta, Cyprus, the Suez Canal, Aden. Every one of those were places in the British Empire Belt and Road, which connected the empire. And the engine, the manufacturing, the workshop of the world was the United Kingdom. And nobody thought it was bad for the rest that the United Kingdom should be manufacturing things and sending them to Africa, to the Caribbean, to Australia, and to the rest of the world. So I think part of the concept that it may be bad is that it's good when you are doing it and it's bad when somebody else is doing it, which it happens to a lot of people in a lot of things in life. But if we believe and we preach that removing barriers to trade is a good thing, then this removes one barrier to trade. The barrier that it removes is the cost of delivery. And the cost of delivery means that something is happening where the goods can reach you faster and cheaper than it would otherwise be by creating and investing in infrastructure. In a way, the genius of this concept is that it is doing physically what the internet is already doing in cyberspace. You see, when we hear people questioning the hidden motives of the things that are happening in China, is Alibaba taking over the world? Well, look, if Alibaba had been born in the United States and Jack Ma had been a teacher in the United States would say, well, look, this is the vision of the American dream. The teacher becomes a multimillionaire. If it happens in China, it's a communist plot, even though it's exactly the same thing. And therefore, it may give an advantage to China, but it only gives an advantage to China if China already has an advantage in the first place. That is to say, it makes the advantage perhaps even greater. But the reality of it is that today, the people are buying more and more on the internet because it is a differential in price, which is very high. Look, this watch strap, which I've got, I can buy in the high street in Gibraltar for £10, or I can buy it in Alibaba for £1.
You can buy 10 cents in China.
Yes, well, I can understand. It's made in China. But the one I buy for £10 also is made for 10 cents in China. So the person that buys it and sells it for £10 is not very keen on, the alternative. The reality of it is that it will be good for him. If the goods get quicker to Gibraltar, then the differential with the online product will be closed. So the movement of physical goods, in fact, is putting from online trading to physical trading in the high street by bringing down the cost of movement of goods. I think it is very difficult to argue that it is a bad thing. It will be a bad thing like everything that is happening already is a bad thing. One of the things that is happening in the United Kingdom, without any Belt and Road Initiative, is the decimation of high street shopping. The fact that we're seeing something that goes contrary to what the speaker in the previous program was talking about branding. One of the things that is happening in the United Kingdom is that the consumer is buying from two German low-cost supermarkets, Lidl and Aldi, who are growing at the rate of 5 or 10% per annum in turnover, while the big companies that have dominated, the big 4 or 5 companies that have dominated retail trade in the UK are shrinking. And that is because consumers are moving away from branded goods because they've discovered that in times they're getting better quality for money by buying Aldi products and Lidl products, right? And if tomorrow, as a result of goods moving cheaper, not just from China, because the Belt and Road Initiative creates the roadway that others can use, that other Asian countries. So part of the problem in the West that I think we have to accept and assume is that we believe, and we say so constantly in the United Nations and in every international forum, that we have to eliminate poverty, that we have to bring the people in the developing countries out of the poverty trap and bring them up to have a quality of life like we have in the West. Well, giving them that opportunity requires that we open our markets to them and that we encourage that. And if they become wealthier, they will be then in a position to buy from us, which now they cannot do because they're too poor. So I think I can think of no single argument that I can put which is rational and not misplaced ideology that sees harm for Europe arising out of the Belt and Road Initiative. And I think there may be people who have vested interest, and that is normal. We all know that, you know, I've been a trade unionist all my life. I'm not a businessman, but I can tell you that in government and as a union, all the businessmen that I've ever met in my country, they all believed in free competition in what they buy and in protection in what they sell. I've never met anybody that didn't believe like that. So, is there a political or a military threat? Well, I don't think so. I think the more interdependent the world becomes, the safer it is, because the more that if one part of that integrated global economy gets into trouble, the trouble is contagious. It spreads out of the world. If you've got a totally isolated economy, you can afford to be more aggressive because you have nothing to lose. If you've got something where a big chunk of your economy depends on customers in another part of the world, then, you know, hostility will lose your customer base. You have to think twice before you're doing it. So I think logic, analysis, common sense says this is good and we should support it.
Yeah, thank you. You touch a very nice point of the nerve about the nice concept of the BRI. But as you may know that no matter e-commerce or logistic issue supply chain on this new Silk Road, the problem is the local government, their priority is to protect their own business, their entrepreneurs. So if e-commerce coming from abroad and the competitors' cost much lower, how can you protect your own business in your own country?
Look, we've got 96 nationalities working in Gibraltar, even though it's a very small place. Mm-hmm. The Chinese element was the 25th group in 2017. It's now the 23rd group in 2018, and it's increased from 46 to 77. So that gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. But the mechanics of it are the same. The reality of it is that in Gibraltar, we have an open market. We're small and we have no restrictions. We are totally open. You know, anybody can come from anywhere in the world and trade with us because we are people who've been traders all our life. Mm-hmm. And we think that we adapt to change and we accept challenges and we succeed. And the proof is that when the rest of Europe has been growing at 1 or 2%, we've been growing at 6 or 7%. So that is what proves that, you see, we are really applying the theory that unrestricted market access actually is a win-win situation because it benefits. Of course, in every situation, there are people that will be put out of business, but you might as well say, well, look, we should never have had cars because all the people who made things for horse-drawn carriages went bust. Well, they didn't go bust. You retrained them and you made them motorcar mechanics, you know? So you adapt, you change, you retrain, and you succeed.
Yeah, I agree with you. You mentioned this morning about political climate change. And Gibraltar can be a role model that open economy is a great thing for every country. If you talk to the European leaders from every other countries, what message you want to deliver except openness? You know, they are politicians, same as you.
Yeah. Well, I think the problem that there is in Europe is that Europe preaches one thing and practices another. That's a reality. You know, I mean, the fact is that I don't know at what stage they are now in what were infamous milk lakes and infamous because of the agricultural policy, mainly driven by France, who has a large agricultural population, therefore a dangerous sector of the electorate, and therefore people from low-cost sources of food, which would have been a good thing, were not allowed to enter into the market by very high tariffs. And the tariffs were designed in a way that the farmers in Europe were guaranteed a price by the state that was well above the market price. And therefore, the state would buy surplus sugar, surplus milk, surplus butter, and then sell it outside the European Union at a loss. In fact, because Gibraltar was never part of the agricultural policy, one of the things that used to happen with sugar was that the Brussels used to subsidize the price of sugar in Spain by having a very high price for sugar, and then the sugar would be bought by the state and sold on the world market. We used to buy the Spanish sugar in the world market, and the Spaniards would cross the border, buy it from us, and take it back into Spain, which shows the insanity when you try to control the market, because the consumer will always find a way around it. So I think it is difficult to say what message you would say, because what we're seeing, which is frankly one of the weaknesses of democracy, is that, you know, for all that you may criticize the lack of freedom of people in a one-party state, the one thing that happens in a multi-party state is that there are people who are willing to give the consumer what he wants, not necessarily what is in the long-term interest. And there are people who will say, well, look, even if it is bad for the economy, in the long run, if people are not going to elect me by delivering this message, then I will change the message to what they want to hear. And when you've got a lot of people contending for the election, the problem you've got is, well, if I don't do it, somebody else is going to do it, and I'm not going to get elected. And this is a serious problem. Populism is the sickness that is affecting liberal democracies in Europe, because the people who don't say what people want to hear don't get voted.
Yeah, totally agree. Thank you very much. May I move this discussion to the online discussion? Connect the professor into our room.
Connected?
Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Good afternoon. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Very well.
There. Okay. Now let's. This is still a Chinese New Year holiday here in Beijing. This is the fourth day of the New Year. So in Beijing, there are still people are spending their holidays. But I know that it's a very interesting topic, so I'm very glad to participate into the discussion. When I receive this information, it's great, because this talk about Belt and Road Initiative, opportunity or threat to Europe. Actually, that's an interesting topic. Of course, thank Sir Bossano, who has just discussed the Belt and Road Initiative and its impact on trade. Indeed, open trade benefit to almost everyone, but of course, as an economist by training, I would go to some more detailed analysis in case there are some winners and losers in the process. Of course, as we know that the Belt and Road Initiative, not only trade, it consists of 5 components: infrastructure, trade, finance, policy coordination, and the connecting of the people. Right? That are the 5 components. But since 2013, the launch of Belt and Road Initiative, some indicative signs already show and reveal themselves. As I can see from European perspective, actually from Chinese perspective connected to China-Europe relationship in this context, there are 3 direct or indirect impact on future development and the consequence and implications of BRI. First, I think when we talk about Europe, from China point of view, Europe has developed, is not at the balanced stage. That means there are developed Europe, just like Germany, France, Benelux, for instance, Switzerland. Right? But there are developing part of Europe. In China's context, we are talking about Central and East Europe. From infrastructure point of view, from infrastructure development point of view, there are much stronger need in the Central and East European countries. In this, China can do more. As China has, in the past 30 years, trained engineering, construction company, and the technical sophistications that could be utilized to modernize and develop this particular part of Europe. We are not saying there are other parts of Europe as a whole do not need infrastructure improvement, but we know, of course, there's other type of infrastructure, for instance, 5G, of course, is a political explosive issue, right? But now, we are talking about that as China view itself could do more in concrete infrastructure, build roads, power plants, and harbors and other things, port. So I think that's why China and the 16 Central and East European countries has developed a mechanism. But of course, the China as the European Union as a whole also has mechanisms. So that's why we need dialogue to mitigate any possible suspicion, right, about that we call the geopolitical other things, right? This is why actually it's a win-win situation. Right? This is one thing. We talk about impact between China and Europe. We talk about Europe. There's just like in China. I teach a course of doing business in China. Actually, China politically is a unified sovereign state, but economically, in term economic development, there are developed China and the less developed part of China. I know this. So that China could see that can play a more important role, a different role in different part of Europe. Of course, we talk about China developing infrastructure. We talk about, of course, overall, Europe and China both benefits. But there are winners and losers, just like Minister Bossano has said, because somebody's interest may or may not be protected in the process. For instance, China merged 2 of the rolling stock companies. That means they're producing railways, because China rolling stock companies. And I read the news that it would become a stronger competitor to Siemens and Alstom. So there are discussion in this week's talk about possible merger between Siemens and Alstom in order to increase the competitiveness of European companies against surging Chinese company, that China rolling stock company. A second example we'll talk about that actually I visited Georgia 2 months ago, and Georgia is developing another route, Silk Route, from Western China, Kazakhstan, to Georgia, and then to Bulgaria to Europe. That's much shorter road than Trans-Siberia Railway. 4 days faster. This takes 10 days before the cargo leaving Shanghai to Europe instead of 14 days. So as a result of this development, so the freight through Trans-Siberia Railroad cut the price, right? That is of course, that's good thing for those shippers, right? Good thing for shippers, the cheaper rate, right? But essentially what we talk about, by and large, the good news, but there are winners and losers. As a policymakers, as well as the executives, we have to analyze and implications, prepared for it. Second part, I will talk about the role, particularly for developed Europe, in the Belt Road Initiative. Actually, there's a more opportunity, I would say. For instance, one of the financial institutions, we talk about finance, is one of the 5 elements, right? That is from China point of view that bring up from BRI. It's Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. It's an institution that most of European countries participated. In addition, China, British was the first one, succeeded, actually jumped overhead of Luxembourg. So actually, that is a financial institution that helped the funds to develop the infrastructure along the Silk Road. Actually, I was the board of directors of the Société Générale in China. That's a French bank. When Chinese and other companies, for instance, Chinese build Silk Road for instance, in Africa, actually, Chinese bank internationalization degree of internationalization is less sophisticated than, for instance, the French bank. So in many of the investment projects that provide opportunities to European banks, European financial institutions in general, right? That join finance this project. I think indeed, China has signed many MOUs with a number of the developed European countries to joint start the project in lesser developed countries along the Belt Road. I also visited Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is often the case cited by some medias considered disaster. I think it's totally untrue. Just 2 weeks ago, Sri Lanka, as Chinese company, China Harbor Engineering Company, completed a level they call Harbor City, with 269 acres of land. I was on site. The intention is to build Sri Lanka, this harbor port, as Singapore in Indian Ocean. Lafayette and many other companies already signed up to develop department stores, provide financial services, other services in the middle of the Indian Ocean. That will play a role as Singapore attract those shoppers, visitors, travelers, tourists to that beautiful island next to India, next to the Middle East, right? That is a very, I don't understand why it's put into very, I was on site, right? I was on site. Of course, the third very important implications from Belt and Road is implication in other less developed countries, particularly in the Middle East and Africa, North Africa. You see, the case here is Ethiopia. I visited Ethiopia last August. You know, one of the threats to Europe is illegal immigrations that run away from their homeland because of poverty, because of war, because of any other conflict. Ethiopia, in my image, was considered a starvation, war, and other things. But actually, after China developed its railway system, connected Addis Ababa to Djibouti, then developed some industrial parks that hired tens of thousands of people, producing shoes, producing garments, and other things. So people in those poor countries, they could find jobs in their homeland. They would less incentive, they have less incentive to run away to nearest rich countries, that's Europe. So I think this, of course, is not a business per se, but it's a side benefit. I would say that the Belt and Road Initiative bring up to the benefits, right, to the region in general. So this is my, of course, time-wise, I just want to bring up this few points and to see that, to seek other comments and to share with other panelists. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wu. Can you hear us from here?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
I can hear you very clear.
Okay, we will drop a few questions because you are connecting online here. I want to ask a very sensitive question, if you allow me. Okay, if you don't allow me, I still ask.
Go ahead.
Belt and Road Initiative got a very much consistent voice from China towards the world. But the opinion from the world is divergent. One important thing many countries issued is China, of course, very nice, gave infrastructure support and try to help countries to build what they need. But many countries, they have no capability to pay back. So they will be forever China's financially slave. What do you think?
Okay, very good question, very good. Actually, indeed, China is by and large still a developing country on the GDP per capita basis. China's GDP per capita is $9,000 US, below the world average. The world average is about $10,000 US, right? But you see, China wanted to develop those infrastructure projects based on its own experiences. The old Chinese saying that you want to get rich, build a road first. Build a road first. That is essentially to develop the infrastructure. I understand that this kind of claim need example to show it. We need facts to support it, right? Actually, what we say point is China does not have sufficient money to throw around, right? Not like some other countries, maybe any countries, right? Even, right, the only superpower in the world, the United States, they also feel that they need more money, right? But now the issue here, the typically people brought up is the harbor city of Sri Lanka. That's why I anticipate the question. So at the beginning, I already brought up. I hope any of you have opportunities, visited Sri Lanka to see what has happened. A new city is emerging. Of course, to develop, there is a way. I think need to be arranged. Right, needs to be arranged. To developing city, actually develop a new city, need deep pocket finance, a long-term finance. Right? What does it mean? That of course, country may have to borrow. What's the alternative? We always think about alternatives. Use example just Sri Lanka. Because US President Pence recent example in its speech regarding China policy. What's alternatives? People will live life without this potential to develop self into draw in the Indian Ocean. Okay? Of course, indeed, that's also based on China's own experience. Some of you, maybe many of you, has visited Shanghai. Today's Shanghai, if you visited 30 years ago, the west part of Shanghai, the old Shanghai, actually, when I educated, by the way, I received my business education in Belgium, Europe, at Catholic University Leuven. My professor at that time told me, if anyone want to make in 1930 Hollywood movies, Shanghai is a good place to shoot the scene. That was 30 years ago. But now you visit Shanghai, particularly the new Shanghai Pudong. This is a harbor of modern finance, high-tech center. You see what happened in Sri Lanka just exactly 30 years ago in Shanghai. China wanted to develop Pudong. Many people against that. Against that, Pudong is a debt trap that will sink for money, for good money, never flies. Now look, what happened? Actually, based on China's own experience, China wanted to use its experience to a certain extent to see how the other countries, not only Shanghai Pudong, Zhengzhou, also there are new city out of Zhengzhou. In the meantime, the city of Zhengzhou also burned a lot of debt. But what that means? Investment. The key things is not debt. Key things is those borrowed money would eventually have a good return. That is a key point. I hope I answered the question. I'm not sure any question. That is but of course, Pudong takes about 20 years. From, I think it's 1992, Deng Xiaoping went to Shanghai, said we need to develop Pudong. 1992 today is 25, 26 years after this done. But of course, we cannot say, wow, in Colombo, Sri Lanka, we just level the land, right? Reclaim the land, and you hope immediately there will be return. Not possible. right? Any sensible person. I do wish if any of you have opportunity, visit this country to see what happens. Not to listen to some, I'm not sure whether any of you have been in there. Please. All right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see in 20 years what will be in Sri Lanka. I want to quickly move to Pino. Pino is, I want to introduce a little bit because Pino is one of the our Erasmus China Business Center affiliated member, very elite member. Also, he is the youngest president in the port all over the world. Very young, so, but experience-wise, very rich. I want to hear from you. You are the frontier soldier connecting with politician, connecting with trade, connecting with tax, customs. So your words, very, very appreciated.
Well, just to be precise, being the youngest doesn't make me the smartest, so whatever I say during the panel, please be lenient. Can I start with a quote from Voltaire after all the speeches that I've heard today, because we are also in a country that has French as a language, and it's from all the positions that I heard so far, it seems like tu es bien, tu vas bien, tu vas le mieux qu'il soit possible. We're in the best of the possible world. I'd rather say no. And not because I want to be always the guy, the white fly or the black sheep in the room, but because I think that we need to sort of step back a little bit and understand exactly and precisely what we're talking about so that we can tackle the issues and understand how to put them forward. To take the title of this panel, Opportunity or Threat, I would say it's an opportunity and a threat. BRI is essentially a tool. Let's take a hammer. A hammer is not good or bad in itself. It could be used for building a house in my garden or smash your head. It's not a fault of the hammer, which is the tool. It's the fault of how I use the hammer. Same thing of the BRI. It's starting essentially as a huge, massive maneuver starting from China to solve particularly internal problem of China. And it's developing in waves. In fact, the Belt and Road that was 2013, it's different from, well, it was also with a different name. Huh? You remember that. It was one belt, one road, and then they wanted to make it less threatening for us, but they kept the same name in Chinese. In fact, it's still Idai Ilu. I love this sophistication in the Chinese commercial mind, because we, as Westerners, somebody was talking about that this morning, we overestimate us and underestimate the others. And whoever is in the business, and as I did for relatively a lot of years, if you enter into a negotiation thinking that your product is better than anybody else and the buyer or whoever is on the other side is stupid, or you can trick in that, it's the worst possible deal you're going to have that day. Unless you are dramatically smart or dramatically mean, sort of. So we tend to underestimate things. We think that we are Europe-centric or Western world-centric, and we think that we deal with everything. And in fact, we realized what was happening with the Belt and Road 3 or 4 years after it all started. First, I would say there's not one Belt and Road. There are several different layers. What is representing in Southeast Asia, it's not what is representing in the Caucasus area. What is representing in Africa, it's not what is representing in the Mediterranean basin / Europe-wise. And again, I am the chairman and CEO of the Port of Venice, which luckily any Chinese representative is putting on the westernmost point on any PowerPoint. That makes me very happy, and please do continue to do so. It's making my pitch abroad much easier. But 3 years ago, we were the westernmost point, and then this year the Chinese government made agreements with Ecuador, Panama, Chile, and then they're moving so west that then soon they will find themselves again back to China. It's not about, of course, somebody was, I think Professor Paris this morning was talking about branding. Well, first and foremost, BRI, it's a huge, successful branding operation. They put together geopolitics 1.0, all bread and butter geopolitics, like Mr. Bossano was talking about today, it's not really different from what the Romans did, the French did, the Spaniards did, and the English Empire did, and the Americans in the 20th century did, just in a different scale with a different perspective. So let's put things into this order so that we can understand what we're talking about, because otherwise it seems like we were like in a big, huge Christmas frenzy where the Chinese are just giving presents to everybody because they are lovely. It may be possible, and I can't exclude that, but it's not exactly like that. It's about, well, you know, in Southeast Asia and Caucasus, it's about geopolitical clout. And power is like water, is filling every void available. So when the Americans retreated from those areas, there was a vacuum, and that vacuum had to be, you know, filled in, and the Chinese quite aptly and quite smartly did that. Then well, there's an additional layer. The professor from China was talking about the 5 things that are consisting or comprising about the Belt and Road. But the Belt and Road is essentially first the tool through which Chinese are trying to sell their overcapacity from their industry so that the middle class in China will still be happy and prosperous and doesn't make any riot. Plain and simple as that. I am asking somebody to rebut this statement. It's not bad. It's absolutely smart, and it's absolutely in their right to do so. They have this as a first key point, because stability is what is needed by China. China, well, you know, at the 19th Congress last year, they put back the Communist Party in the constitution. It was taken away for a while, but it has been put back because stability of the Communist Party is the most important thing in China. 2049 is the next goal. You know, we as Europeans or Westerners, we talk about 2018, 19, 21 is already too far away. 2025, it's unbelievable. They are talking about made in China 2025 short-term program. 2049 made a moderately prosperous society. President Zhang said that, and any other president and chairman after him kept that promise. They have that aim in their mind. But, you know, you need to combine that. There's a lot of history behind that. You need to combine things to understand what we're talking about. But what I'm grateful the most to China is that they, with the Belt and Road, they brought back the attention to infrastructures. Of course, it's amazing, the e-commerce, it's great. But let's please remember that the last mile and the mile before and 2 miles before are not made by bits. They're carrying all goods on a vessel. UNCTAD data means they're representing 80 to 90%, according to trades and goods, are carried at least once in their life as a product on board of a vessel. They're seaborne, which essentially means that they see at least 2 ports, loading ports, discharging ports. So we're talking about, again, hardware. It's of course, digital innovation, we could go into that. It's part of my job as well, I know, to innovate and develop a very digital, connected port system and so on and so forth, but I don't think I have time now. But, you know, we talk about infrastructure again. We thought there was a time where we're thinking that everything could have happened in the web, you know, that everything. But since we haven't invented a teleport system of Star Trek, we still need to move things physically. So connectivity, Parakana, a great writer, author, who, by the way, has just issued a new book that says The Future is Asian. Very, very interesting reading. I've pre-ordered that. I haven't read it yet because it's not yet available. But he wrote, the last book that he wrote is called Connectography. Connectivity is the real currency of power of today. Because if you control the choke points in the military words, as they are said, or the key points in the world, along which trades are carried, then you don't really need to shoot bullets or conquer land, because you just need that single specific land. It's not random that the first ever abroad military base that China has built is in Djibouti. I don't think because they love sand. It's because it's Bab el-Mandeb, which in turn is letting you control the door to Suez, which in turn is letting you control the Mediterranean Sea, so Europe. it's not evil, or it's not, there's not a conspiracy behind that. There is a quite legitimate action from China in taking their piece of a cake, as we all did, in our countries did in the past. As you have noticed probably in all this picture, I never mentioned the word Europe, because there's not a strategy towards this thing in Europe. Let's put it quickly in line so that I don't take too much space in this first round. Well, you know, Chinese quite aptly started to work. Well, they tried to work with Europe. Europe said, I don't know, I'm quite afraid. And the north of Europe has different sensitivity from the south of Europe and the east of Europe, from the west of Europe. And Chinese, as we know very well, they are very commercial-oriented guys. They said, well, we're wasting time with them. Let's think outside the box. So they created a 16+1, which essentially breaks Europe in two, because it's 16 countries, 11 of which in EU, 5 of which with euro in their pockets, that are directly negotiating once in a year with China. Bam! Big cleavage inside the European institutions. And then the Chinese went even smarter, because they negotiated a bilateral agreement with Germany, a bilateral agreement with France, and a bilateral agreement with Spain, and one is in the pot for Italy. So the only leverage that Europeans had, which was having a 500 million market of people with high spending power, remember the overcapacity absorption, was gone to the wind and left the pitch completely open to be lost into this. So there wasn't a strategy, there's still not a strategy. So it's not a threat in itself, it's a threat if you don't govern anything, if you don't have a strategy into that. Just in a nutshell, we have two big strategies coming along. The revision of 2023 10T network, which is essentially the connectivity network of Europe, within and outside, and the CEF2 Connecting Europe Facility Finance, 32 billions. 32 billions is not the numbers of China, but it's not a small amount of, you know, it's not pocket money. I'd love to have that as a pocket money. We're not talking about that. We are not even remotely talking about that as a unity. So we're not thinking, like Chinese are thinking, how do we connect our markets to the rest of the world? How do we make that intuition that the Chinese are offering to the world something positive to us? The balance will be win-win if I create value on my territory. If my friends in Shanghai is doing is good businesses and is becoming rich, but my guys in my port areas are not, that's not a win-win. It's a win-win for China. It's not win-win for China-Europe. And I can't blame them for trying to make the best out of it. I blame ourselves in not having a clear, straightforward, smart, wise strategy to counterbalance that. You know, negotiating is just counterbalancing interest and finding the best compromise that is making everybody happy. So, you know, the whole thing is not, it's a threat and an opportunity. It's up to us if we wake up and start to work on that without the superficiality of taking things like, oh, they are so nice, they are giving us money for free, or, oh God, this is the empire of evil. We need to start work on that. We need to study clearly what we want out of this, and then we need to have our platform that we share with the Chinese. In this deconnectivity platform is on, I tell you, I'm working on with the European Commission. We are actually Wednesday, I'll be in Brussels to discuss this. We're talking about the 10T network, but each country, even each cluster of ports, and they're presenting their own proposal. So everybody is rushing to have the longest berth, the best crane, the biggest railway connectivity. We're not even examining whether we have a need of connectivity, where we have overcapacity, undercapacity. We can maximize, we can optimize, how we can spend better our money. Well, if we don't know these that are some sort of like the homeworks that you need to do before you sit at the table, that of course is a threat, because the Chinese will take the best out of the situation and we will wake up 10 years afterwards. I hope I made quickly my point. I'm sorry if I was too long, but it's as you understand, a topic that I'm very passionate about.
Thank you so much. It's a very sharp argument. Thank you. if I remember correctly, 2 years ago, we were sitting in Brussels talking about this topic, and 2 years, there are too much already progressed from Chinese side. You know, even my PhD students almost finished a PhD thesis on Belt Road Initiative. But if we see the European side, the end of last year, the EU already issued this connectivity strategy, but nothing happened so far, no plan so far. So that gives the business and entrepreneurs from the bottom up a lot of confusions, a lot of troubles. They don't know, it's like they don't know where to fly and where to connect with. And at this panel, we have politicians here, we have educators here, we have business people here. Pino, if I ask you, if you give one strategic advice to business people, no, we forget about politician right now, okay? Yeah, what would you give?
Well, first and foremost, do your homeworks. Know what you are, know what you want to achieve from a thing, and more than anything, know the guy that you are negotiating with. Again, we approach for decades, but even now, China, as if China would be the place where we're going there and we trick them into the best agreements because we are so smart, because we are the Westerners. And China has 5,000 years of commercial history. You were using paper when we were living in a cave, essentially. So, you know, it's a hugely arrogant to approach a negotiation without knowing the guy that is in front of you, his culture, his uses, how he thinks, or she, how he's approaching, because that is absolutely leading you to big blunders or underestimations, or anyway, not bringing home the best out of that negotiation. Plus, you look like a moron. Which is always bad, because that guy will make a deal with you and no more. So again, you know, we really, I miss a lot. I'm a guy from business, but I also enjoy very much academic life. So whenever I can, I give some lectures and everything. I think we need to do homeworks. You need to, before you speak about a topic, you need to study hard. You need to do everything you can to be the smartest guy in that room, but also the most prepared guy in that room, because knowledge is power. So again, we need to, you know, get rid of our over structures and thinking that we're the center of the world. We're not. It's just the maps that we paint that are putting us there. We're not there. And you know, again, studying, knowing, being open and curious, have a strategy at the end of that helps in making the best negotiations and bargain.
So much.
Thank you.
So from this point, I really encourage everyone, online, offline, to join RSM China Business course. It's just 2 days. Apologize, I just do some advertisement. If you want to know more, then join us. I give the floor to my colleague from CEIBS. So Philipp, you're working for CEIBS, and you're also a China expert. If I understand right, every season you have students flying from China coming to Zurich, Europe, understanding Europe. So this happened also in our university. We see more Chinese people flying in to be trained to understand European culture, European business, than European students going to China, European business people get together, be trained in China. What is your opinion on Belt Road Initiative and your experience on this? Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to share also a few things on my side. It's not much to edit what we have heard, and I share a lot of what Pino just mentioned before, that when we talk about BRI, there is huge opportunities, but also at the same side, huge threats. And maybe to add a few things which have not been mentioned in order to, instead of repeating what we have already have heard, I maybe just pick out a few points. And I think my school, being a joint venture between the European Union and the Chinese government, actually tries to avoid that we have morons at the tables negotiating with each other. We really want actually to facilitate, to be that bridge between Europe and China. And I think one particular aspect which we need to consider is, Pino is absolutely right that the whole BRI focus and intention behind has been to handle overcapacity, which we have seen over the last years in China, to bring to Europe to create or stabilize the markets and the economic development in China. However, what we see over the last years actually, that producing in China becomes more and more expensive, and a lot of Chinese companies actually started to bring their capacity for production to Central and Eastern Europe countries and use the cheap labor there to produce and then bring the goods back to the change in the China society into more consumption markets. So I think this is an interesting notion which we have not heard before, but this is also part of that One Belt, Belt and Road initiative. I agree we should use plurals than One Belt, One Road, because what we see is a lot of different routes and connectivities which are created on that side. And Professor Wu mentioned something quite interesting. I'm not sure if you have heard that notion, which is a Chinese proverb, that if you want to get rich, that you have to build a road first. And he brought up the example of Pudong, the development of Pudong. And China government is trying to replicate that Chinese development model along that One Belt, One Road routes or maritime routes as well. And it's very simple. You build infrastructure first. You start with the infrastructure, you see first trades happen very easy on low level, but with high frequency. This actually is creating some consumption, not only locally, but also brings back the trades to the home markets. And with that increase in trade, your values actually raise, and your infrastructure creates a certain value. And with these additional values which have been created, you use as collateral for a second wave and a third wave, etc., of development. And not sure if we're going to see this as we have seen it in China, because I think there are different realities, not only in Europe, but along the roads to Europe. And I don't think the big challenges is what we're going to see is Europe. I rather see countries like what Professor Wu mentioned, the ones he has visited, Sri Lanka, you name it, in Africa, other countries, because I think the biggest challenge we're going to see in the future is how he's going to use the finances, the developing of the finances in this situation. If the economy is going to cool down, China has a huge challenge to handle the finance situation, because this is all borrowed money, normally based on a public-private partnership, and then the banks jumping in to finance these projects, and they want to see a return on investment. And the question is indeed, if the economy is cooling down, what's going to happen to these loans, to this huge debt China is facing. And maybe one last point to mention, which I again agree with Pino. He said it's all about infrastructure. Yes, but also we have intangible sides of infrastructure, which may be something quite interesting to see what China is able to do. I'm not sharing my travel itinerary with you, but also we have a campus in Ghana, and I was recently there. And it's quite interesting to see that the cooperation between ICBC and Standard Bank in Africa allows you now to wire money within 15 minutes from one bank account in Europe or in China to a bank account in Africa. Try to make this in Switzerland or in Europe. You need at least half a day, if not a full day, until you can get your money in the bank accounts and retrieve it. So there's a lot of development on top of that basic infrastructure, which brought to these countries by Chinese investments, which facilitates local business development and local trade with the clear intention that China is going to profit of these, no doubt.
In your school, how did you, in which way you deliver Belt and Road Initiative to the audience? Because you have Chinese audience, you have European audience. Which tone are you actually speaking to them?
Yeah, well, maybe we are too Chinese when it comes to this, because if you listen to Chinese politics, when they talk about BRI, there's always two cornerstones. One is the trade part, and one is the intercultural integration and adaptation of political systems, etc. So we are more on that second pillar by really trying to generate an understanding between the cultures and the business people. What does it mean to cooperate and to do business together? And in this notion, I think we try to really be a part of that Belt and Road initiatives, also with that Center of Globalization, which we created in Shanghai, which helps Chinese companies, I'm not talking about state-owned companies, I'm talking about private companies, to go global. And global most of the time means Central East Asia first, and as a second step then coming to Europe.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Any questions from our audience regarding Belt and Road Initiative? Oh, sorry. Where is the micro?
Hi, my name is Yo Wang from Fontys University in the Netherlands. Well, I have been living in the Netherlands for, let's say, Europe for more than 10 years. And so part of me is quite European, I have to say. And when I look at the Road and Belt Initiative, how European Union or how European people, how they react to it, I have to say, as a Chinese part of me feel really proud. But however, European part of me feel a little bit disappointed. Because I do think it's a good opportunity for European Union or European countries to grab and to work together with China, how to develop European Union or European countries themselves. And then I also think the Europeans see it as a threat because there are a few reasons. And mainly, if I look at, because I'm from a university, so I do have students who are working for the companies who are really participating in the Belt and Road Initiative. One of the company is a logistics company that they have 3 times a week, which they send trains from Rotterdam Harbor to China and back. So what happens is those trains, when they go to China, they're empty, and when they're back, they are full. So what does it say? Which means we Europeans demand a lot from China, but we have nothing to offer, or we don't have enough to offer. That's the reason why I think Europeans are taking it as, or Western country, taking the Road and Belt Initiative as a threat, which the European part of me feel a little bit disappointed. In my opinion, as I have said earlier, that it's a good opportunity for the European countries to work together with China, especially in the globalization. If we see nowadays the United States as the dominant power in the world, and it's a little bit sad to say, oh, it's my personal opinion, the Europeans are doing whatever America is telling you guys to do. And it's the time to man up and then have your own opinion, that's my own feeling. And also, well, when you have nothing to offer, then I do think then the rising dominant power of China can be a threat to you. But I would say, don't be afraid. So it's the time that you have to discover what you have to offer and what you can benefit from what the Chinese are offering, and then try to benefit from what they have and try and take the opportunity and make your country also a better place. That's my, feeling.
I know Pino can answer your question. This is a technical question we discussed before.
Okay, let's start with the trains. They're not going empty because we don't want to. It's because they're coming full, because they are heavily subsidized by the government. The most amazing train in the world is carrying 2,000 tons of goods. The most stupid vessel in the world is carrying 10,000 tons of goods. It doesn't make any sense, transport-wise or logistic-wise, trying to shift the modality from vessel to train unless it's heavily subsidized. And that's why you have a lot of things coming from China, because there is a political reason to use that, because building the railways is building infrastructures, and when you build the rails, as the well, they had a bad name. The Robin Barons in the United States in the 1980s were doing that. You know, you put the rails and then you put people along the side. So you need that to exercise that political clout that I was talking about. But transport-wise, it's not even remotely possible to consider that as a valid alternative to ship. I give you just a quick example. If time factor is relevant, because your goods are so valuable that time factor is relevant, you put them on a plane. But they have a very high marginality. If time factor is not so relevant, you put them on the ship because the marginality is minimal. In between, there's nothing, unless you heavily subsidize that. Because you gain 10 days or 12 days, which if you're trading grain doesn't make any sense. And if you have, I don't know, like precious jewels or very important things that have a time constraint, you don't put them on a train that is letting you save some days when you can put them on a plane and deliver them tomorrow. That's the first point. I don't think we're afraid for nothing to offer. It's just, can I shift it on my side? I'm a port manager and CEO, and I've got an industrial cluster which is served and serving my ports. We, as Italy, we are the second largest manufacturing country of Europe. So we're a manufacturer. If I flood my markets with cheap Chinese materials, my throughput in my ports will spike in import for the first 3 years, and my hinterland will die at the 4th year. Did I serve the interest of my industrial hinterland? Not quite. So again, you see, we need to see things on the perspective. It's not about fear. It's about a fair negotiation, and China is doing its own part. We have to do our own, because it's not like, you know, again, it's not a Christmas party. It's markets, and it's negotiations, and it's money, and power, and repositioning on the planet. It's absolutely right and amazing that China is proposing that to the world. It's not necessarily an answer directly meaning I accept everything that you are offering, the one that it should be done. But again, it's not because of China that we're in a corner. It's because the rest of, at least Europe, we didn't come up with anything decent so far in terms of proposal and strategy.
Yeah, Pino, I want to thank you because you uncover a true truth of these technical things. If we add the time as an extra variable. If I continue asking you a technical question about the sustainability, I heard once from a technical person in the railway sector, he told me that the cost for transportation per kilometer with Chinese train are much higher than European train. And he cannot understand why we not deliver goods from here, there, you already explained. But I want to ask you, to what extent these things will be sustainable? Because I believe that Chinese government can subsidize, you know, all the time, but this kind of a connection by using the railway train, to what extent will be sustainable?
Very good question. For as long as they are heavily subsidized, that's the answer. Or I guess in the hope of the Chinese side is you try to subsidize something to build momentum, to create a market, and if that market starts to flow and go on its own legs, then you take the subsidy away because you created something, you created the offer of something that wasn't there before. I am, again, because of the marginalities so dramatically higher in a train than in a ship, and so dramatically lower in terms of advantages on a train towards a plane, it doesn't really make sense, at least to my eyes. But then, you know, 5 years ago, we were not thinking about transports and supply chain in the way that we think today. So 5 years from now, we'll probably be in a totally different position. But again, I think, when you have the firepower in terms of economy of China, it's worth to try every possible way. You can't know that in advance if you don't try.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, from Chengdu to Tilburg and Tilburg to Rotterdam.
Chengdu. And if you have, let's say, the new industrial power center in Chengdu area and in Chongqing, it's been a long way to Shanghai to the harbors. So I would not take it black and white. And I think on the way to Warsaw, you pass all other cities. So they drop off goods and pick up goods from other people. Belt and Road is not only from China to Warsaw, it's also from the way carrying people up and down.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the point is that we don't even have the same gabarit. We don't even, which is the shape of the train. In Europe it's PC80, and in China it's completely different. So you need to shift. And that's why they have cargos and all the dry ports in between. And that, every time you touch a cargo and you move it from one modality to another modality, whether it be ship to shore, train to train, anyway, you make a loss. Again, it makes sense in terms of connectivity. The most important part of the railway connectivity is that you are connecting the coastal, super developed part of China with the inner part of China, which is not so developed. That's a very Chinese issue that they are trying to solve it this way. Makes sense, absolutely. Does it make sense in terms of logistics, supply chain, efficiency, and economical marginality when you are trading worldwide? Not quite at the moment. I can't exclude that things are happening or changing. But again, if you, in due time, we should have the same rails, the same rules, and we are ages away from that. When it will be in the ships, it's all uniform. The rules are the same. You get from one port to another. Everything is absolutely plain and simple. You may have some differences in customs, but how things are traded and moved, it's the same. Shanghai, Venice, Los Angeles, Wellington, wherever. I mean, it doesn't change that. So again, those are just technical things, and they don't work unless there is a heavy subsidy behind that at the moment.
We talk a lot about this morning about the structural change of Europe, then we can have a better model. And in China, we also have a structural problem. From the trade war right now, Donald Trump push so hard just to try to change China's structural problem in his eyes, that China shouldn't behave as a business, but behind is a government subsidized so much. So with Europe on the railway, it's same, like European country firms, they are playing as a business, but Chinese firms, railway, they're playing as a government. So their size is different. That's a construction structure problem, conflict. If want to change, in my eyes, we should change together, have a universal map, and then talk on the same table. We not have enough time, but I will allow the last question to be asked. Anyone? You? No? No questions? Okay, then thank you very much for this panel, and let's get back on time.